we begin with the life and career of a comedy giant.
Greetings, good citizens, the prologue.
Don't say anything, no, it's cruel, no, don't.
Oh, no.
Just make myself comfy.
Well, yes. Oh, no, listen. No, missus.
Hello, and welcome to There'll Never Be Another, Frankie Howerd. I'm Graham Garden, and no, none of those impressions was mine. Nay, thrice... No, they came from colleagues and admirers whose voices you'll be hearing over the next hour.
Frankie Howerd was an 18-carat original.
Michael Grade.
Terrible worrier. Sick with worry before every performance. Very nice and sweet man, but not funny off the stage. And if you think about his material, he didn't really tell jokes.
He was a number one. He was a glistening idol.
Eric Sykes.
I've never known anybody to come up to him who could get an audience rolling with laughter 2 minutes after walking on. And in 5, he'd have them eating out of his hand.
I'm all right, but I'm a bit poorly myself, really. Thank you, that's right, get your R's out.
He was a master of his craft. And I've always been appalled at the fact that comics and comedy of that ilk, that vaudevillian thing, is the lowest common denominator, and it's the hardest job of work to do.
Oh, what a week. What a week, ladies and gentlemen. I know you haven't come here to hear my troubles, you've got troubles of your own. But oh, what a week. Oh, never again. Started on Monday. Well, of course, most weeks do, I know that, but still. Now, I tell you how it started. I know. No. No, I tell you how it started.
Now, I'm in repertory in Warminster, having been demobbed and that, and I get a phone call from one of the lads who used to be with me in the early days, and he said, Frankie Howerd wants to get in touch with you, and he wants to know if he can have the material that you used to use when you were the principal comedian in Strictly Off the Record. Now, I'd never met Frank in Germany, but to have a call from him, because Frankie Howerd was the biggest thing in the country. He was alternating every Sunday night in a show called Variety Bandbox with Derek Roy, but every Sunday that Frank was on, I think he had 42% of the population. That was nearly half the country used to listen to Frankie Howerd.
Welcome to Variety Bandbox.
Now, good evening, everybody. Now, don't mess about now.
So I rang up Frankie and I said, well, you don't want the act that I used to do, because it was pinched from here, there and everywhere. Just put it in a list and I just did it. And he said, well, do you think you could write for me? And I said, well, when do you want it? He said, well, 8 days from now. I said, all right, hang on a minute, have you got a bit of paper? So I wrote him out the first script. Now, the script wasn't jokes, because I don't like jokes per se. It was a situation where he was a messenger boy, and his first job was having to take 2 elephants to Crewe from London, which meant taking them down Regent Street. He had a bit of string round the necks, leading them on, and he felt such a fool, and all this nonsense. Got them down to the tube, and of course it was the rush hour, so he couldn't get them both on. He had to tie one up to a chocolate machine, and, well, this is how it went.
And of course, the elephant was furious because he had to stand. Anyway, it's paid the devil. So no, I got it to King's Cross Station. I parked it there, you see. Then I came back to the other one I'd left tied up. And when I got there, it was gone. So I said to a porter, I said, look, I left an elephant here tied to a slot machine. It's gone. He said, yes, and so is our slot machine. Anyway, I dashed in the street and looked for it. Oh, I'd soon see the way it had gone, because there was crowds of people lining the road waiting for the rest of the procession. What a silly thing to do. I mean, you'd feel like more sense, wouldn't you? And honestly, I've never seen such a silly crowd of people in all my life. None of you were in Tottenham Court Road, were you? No. I didn't think you were. Anyway, what was that? Yes, here we are. Yeah, oh, there was one, mind you, yes. There was one man. One man got in its way. And as they were prizing him out of the road, he said, yes, poor soul. He said, yes. He said, it's in the news theatre. It's gone in the news theatre. So I dashed over, and the girl in the pay box was playing the devil. She was mad. She said, come on, she said, it's occupying 8 1 and 9 seats. Who's going to pay? So I got inside this news theatre, and there was the elephant, there was the elephant, sat in the best seats, yes, asleep. So, and the people behind were saying, why don't you take your hat off? Anyway, there was the manager was there, the manager of the theatre was there, yes, and he was trying to leave the elephant onto a pram, you see. So, to get it out. So I said, it's my elephant. I said, look, I'll help you if you like. Shall I help you? He said, now get that side, then we'll now heave. Now this time he said, now let's all heave. Heave this time. Heave. And the people behind were saying, shh. Hey? Well, it was a good film. I said, this time, heave, etc. Heave. I was sweating like a pig. Heave. Oh, I said, this is no good. I said, we shall never get it into the aisle. He said, you fool, I'm trying to get it out of the aisle. Then, he said, well, thank goodness. He said, one thing, it's made no noise up to now. I said, yes, But I said, in a minute he might trumpet. He said, He said, yes. He said, does it play whist as well, or he was a fool?
It was a situation, and all I was doing was using his character to write the script. But when I'd read it to him, he said, yeah, I like that. So he did it, and of course he was successful. Can you get me that on for the next fortnight? I said yes, and I came up with that, and I read that to him. Well, after about 8 weeks or something, that's 4 scripts, he said, would you like to join me personally? So I said yes. So I became his official scriptwriter, and he was probably the first comic in the country to have a scriptwriter. And I lived in Oldham, and I went home one weekend, and it was a nice warm Sunday evening. And I walked along this street, and every door was open. Because it used to be in those days when it was nice warm evening. And out of every door, I could hear Variety Bandbox and Frankie Howerd saying the lines that I'd written. And there was nobody else on the street. And I was walking along, and I had to hug myself because I knew what the next line was. And the next line, and the next line. I mean, can you do that today, that you could walk along the street where every door be open and you'd be all the same program would be? You might do it with, like, Coronation Street or something. You might hear that music. But a comic?
Does your nose smell? Is your house lived in?
Can you hear yourself shout?
Then,
We're the men to help you just when things were all to pot. We men, we all to chop and change and life we do a lot. So if you've any problems, then you must come round and see.
the assistant Billy Turnant.
And Frankie Howerd,
I had the chore of writing the opening spot, which you used to do with Billy Turnant, who was the leader of the orchestra.
Tonight's topic is how to speak English. And I shall be assisted, with the accent on the ass, by Mr. William Turnant, a bachelor of, bachelor. And when Mr. Turnant heard that the subject was, he immediately left his college.
Thank you, Mr.
Wait a
Howerd.
minute, let me finish. He immediately left his college pudding to come here and assist me in how to speak English. Now, Mr. Turnant, tell me, how do you speak English?
I talk.
Give him the money, Barney. No, I mean, is your English good or bad?
I can safely say I stand out.
You stand out all right. Now, very well, Mr. Turnant, since English is your strong point, you ask the question.
Right. First of all, vowels. A, E, R, ooh, ooh.
There's half my last act gone now.
Second spot, with a film star of that time, we had Donald Wolfett, Richard Attenborough, we had all those people.
The best actors and actresses in the world. I mean, Richard Burton, Claire Bloom, I mean, loads of, because they all came on as guests.
Alan Simpson, who, with Ray Galton, succeeded Eric Sykes as Frankie's writers.
And for us, I mean, new to the business, it was wonderful. I mean, very,
The other thing about Frank with those guests is he would treat them like dirt, really. He would pretend not to know them or unimpressed by their performances. We used to have great fun in writing stuff with Frank, like Burton would say, well, what did you think of my performance? It was, yes, it was. I like your socks. He's a great comedian for finding and encouraging writers. And I think one of the main reasons for that is that he hoped not to pay them. You know, well, I mean, don't do this, do that. And he, unbeknownst to lots of writers that he would get the script and then tout it around to other people. Would you have a look at this? I mean, see what you think.
We know this because years later he used to do it to us, Because as I said, he always used to give young writers a chance, which not many comedians would. He wasn't one of these blokes who say, "Oh no, I've got to have known writers." I mean, when he was a big star, that's the thing about it. And a lot of writers have reason to be extremely grateful to Frank.
I got quite a lot of other work to do, so eventually the BBC wanted Frank to do another series. And they approached me, and I talked to Frank, and I said, I'm sorry, Frank, I've got this, that, and the other. Well, the BBC said they were not prepared to do the series unless I wrote for it. So we compromised, and as long as I edited it. Now, luckily, we got that company going, Associated London Scripts. So I had Simpson, Galton, Johnny Spate, and about 3 other writers all writing it. And to write for Frank, it's fairly simple, because he's about 80% of the battle.
When I started to work for Frank, they knew me as a young comedian.
Barry Took.
And they knew I could write a bit. And I started to write for him and Marty Feldman. We were friends and we were writing bits and pieces. So we worked quite well for me, I think. And the first time we said the script, and I went, "Oh, here it is." When I brought it, he said, "It's not bad." He said, "It's my stuff, don't all the oohs and ahs and all that. You haven't put it in." And I said, "Well, we thought they invented that." "Oh, no." So we said, "We'll give her the scripts back." And we got the script back, and we screwed it up to the point. We went, oh, she's a funny woman, and all the rest of it, and all the jokes you could think of, chili. And gave it back and went, "Yes, that's better."
Frankie used to play games with writers. He was outrageous.
Barry Cryer.
If you didn't put the ooh, ah, no, listen, missus, and don't take a vote on it and all this, if you didn't put them in, he'd say, where are the oohs and the ahs? And if you did put them in, he'd say, no, I do that. He always wrong-footed writers.
We would indicate in there, a couple of oohs and a couple of just to indicate where they should go. But I mean, Frank's hesitation and the oohs and ahs mainly because, especially on television, he was trying to remember what the next line was. That's
All his waffle was really trying to remember where he was in the script, and that would be all his to get back to the line. The great thing about Frank was that if he landed a joke, when he landed a joke, he really gave it 110%. But a bit like Wilfrid Bramble, sometimes he would stumble in the middle of and you cannot stumble in a joke, kill it stone dead. Luckily, that wasn't too often, but that was all part of that ooh-ah business, really.
You never knew from the ums and ers which direction he was going next.
Nicholas Parsons.
And sometimes I think Frankie did. I mean, he ummed and erred until he got the laugh, and then he'd suddenly feel it coming and he'd move off like that. So, in other words, the hesitancy that he displayed was part of his nervousness, but he utilised that to his advantage and capitalised on it and was able to take off in different directions and get a great deal of comedy out of it. No, he was an exceptional comedian.
Yes, I do get nervy. Well, I think you do, living on your own, don't you? I say living on my own because I've got me goldfish. But they're not very demonstrative, are they, goldfish? You can't really get close to a goldfish, can you? It's not much company. When you open the door, come home at night, they don't leap out of their bowl and lick you, do they? Still, after all, they've got their own lives to lead. I can't burn them with my worries. But I think loneliness is a terrible thing, Oh, I do, especially when you're on your own. At night times, no, don't. No, please. Don't mock. Mocking? Who's mocking?
He was always so flustered on the stage. And you could never time Frankie Howerd. You said to him, we just need 12 minutes here, Frank. That's all we need. We need 12 minutes. And some nights you get 6. Some nights you get 24. He was not what you would call a precision comedian. But my goodness, he was funny.
Ladies and gentlemen, I must warn you that parts of this show are unsuitable for persons of a nervous disposition. Oh! That's the part that's unsuitable. No, listen, I'll tell you something. I've had a shock this week. There's no reason why you shouldn't have one. I know.
He lacked confidence. Incredible, really, but he did.
Comedy writer and producer Jimmy Casey.
And never did an ad-lib in his life. He said it himself on television once. He could not ad-lib. The idea of walking on without a script terrified him.
I thought it was all off the cuff.
Paul O'Grady, a.k.a. Lily Savage.
And then after he died, I was reading a book and it said he used to go out and practice on cows in fields and every last ooh and misses and titter was timed to perfection. But he doesn't go down in my estimation for that. Just shows that he was perfectionist and managed to pull it off by making it look like it was spontaneous, although it was all cleverly rehearsed, and that's only to be admired. He was a great comic, Frankie Howerd. He was smashing. And the Three Little Fishes, when he sings the Three Little Fishes, I could listen to that again. That's another thing from a kid, from children's favourites. Whenever that came on, the radio was turned up. Stood on a stool with my ear against the radio and listened.
Now down in the meadow, in a little fishy pool, lives 3 little fishes and a mama fishy too. Now swim, said the mama fishy, swim if you can. Are you taking the mickey? So they swam and they swam right over the dam. There was George. Who did Dad want me? There was Perce. Who did Dad want me? And there was Cecil. Who did Dad want me? He was a snob. He was dying to get into an aquarium. So they swam and they swam right over the dam. All right, whoa! Don't start that again. Right. Now stop, said the mama fishy. You'll get lost, or I'll pay you. Ooh. I hope you won't get the impression I'm mad, because I'm not. But the 3 little fishes weren't going to be bossed. Come on, they said, let's go out on a spree. Oh, so they swam and they swam right down to the sea. George, who didn't Dad want me? Perce, who didn't Dad want me? So they swam and they... Wait a minute, we've lost Cecil. Cess, come on, boy, get up there. Who didn't Dad want me? Well, there's no need to fly into a passion. So they swam and they swam right down to the sea. Gosh, it's the little fishes, here's a lot of fun. We'll play around here until day is done. This is ridiculous, isn't it?
He had had great success as a young man, as a radio comedian, and had gone out of fashion suddenly. He was no longer Flavour of the Month, and he had a long period in the wilderness.
I think his style, or something, went out. When the theatres dipped, Frankie dipped as well, and he didn't really make any mark on television.
I remember having him round to play him the score of a musical version of Midsummer Night's Dream, which we did, and we wanted him to play Bottom. He just had a huge success playing Bottom at the Old Vic, and it seemed a good idea.
Ned Sherrin.
However, at that time, I think he was going through a bad patch, and he ascribed a lot of it to the fact that people, now he'd been to the Old Vic, weren't quite sure whether he was a straight actor or whether he was a comedian, and he felt he was confusing them. I don't think, in fact, he was confusing them. I think that it was simply that at that time he'd suddenly become unfashionable with the commercial television stations, because the commercial television people, when at that time most of it was live, used to be terribly discomfited by Frankie's habit of oohing and ahhing and ad-libbing, and so he'd be top of the bill at the London Palladium, which everybody knew perhaps started at 9 and finished at 10, and at the time when they were absolutely needing to cut to the credits, and then from the credits to the commercials which were paying for the programme, Frankie would still be going on and expanding, and so he got a lot of black marks from the commercial networks.
The big write-off of Frank's career was after we split with Hancock, and Tom Sloan at the BBC, who's head of comedy, invited us in and said, right, what are you going to do? And we said, well, we'd like to write a series for Frankie Howerd. And he said, no, you can't do that.
He's finished. That was his basic thing. He said, no, Frank, he's finished, he's gone.
So that was an indication of, one of Frank's troughs.
For some reason, he just became unfashionable. He was really, really difficult for him. And that was at a point where I became his agent, really.
Beryl Virtue.
I represented a number of writers, Galton and Simpson and Spike Milligan and Eric Sykes and Johnny Speight, and they were great fans of his. And the boys said, well, why don't you come and join us and Beryl will look after you. So he was very agitated about it, very depressed. Well, not surprisingly, really. And so I then got an idea, thinking, well, where could we work then if everybody else doesn't seem to want him? So I thought of cabaret. So that made him even more agitated, really. But I said, well, look, let's try, because it's something new. And he hadn't really done that in London, and I didn't know much about it either. But I had heard of the Blue Angel, a nightclub. Never been there, but I'd heard of it. So I looked it up in the phone book, got the phone number, rang the man up and said, could I come and talk to him about Frankie Howerd? So he was hugely intrigued by this because they weren't used to having people of that calibre, really. Anyway, to cut a long story short, he did do the cabaret there and he was very successful.
When the satire boom came in, those comics were seen to be slightly out of date and old-fashioned.
Eric Idle.
Suddenly it was all post-Cook. The Frost World came in and did Peter Cook sort of rip-off stuff and then became satire. And it was very wonderful somehow, I think, when the Establishment Club got going, that Frankie Howerd came back and he abused and attacked all these modern satirists, you know, in the only way that Frankie could. And, you know, it was the Establishment. He came to the Establishment and said, oh, it's a lovely place, isn't it? Lovely. Be very nice
when it's finished. It's very... They told me the sets have all been done by this Cian Kenny. And I mean, she's very clever, I know. I find it very wooden here.
It was a very show-busy audience, and I remember particularly Kenneth Williams was there, laughing so loudly you almost had to send him out of the room. You know that cackle that Kenneth Williams had.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to watch this sight of one comedian laughing at another one. It's very rare, very rare. And of course, writing it down at the same time. Shut up, you. Anyway, listen. Listen. Yes. Is he trying to steal the limelight, do you think?
Kenneth Williams steal the limelight? Well, not according to his diary of September the 26th, 1962, in which he wrote, "To the Establishment Club to see Frankie Howerd. He was V good, but his performance was marred by an awful woman who kept shouting and interrupting him. I must say he bore it all with good humour." As he did William's laughter. Here's Nicholas Parsons again.
Johnny Speight wrote this script, which was rather political, and Johnny loved writing political jokes. And Frankie, I'm sure with tremendous nervousness and tremendous trepidation, went out onto the boards of the Establishment, where he only had the young, modern, with-it comics of the day, who were doing a lot of what was called satire and so forth. And Lenny Bruce came over and guested there. And it was very courageous of him, but he had some good material. But you know, the art of comedy is, when you face an audience, your first laugh is the most important one. The last one's important too, but get them your first joke, and you can away. And Frankie was given this fabulous opening line. He went out and said, now, I know that you've got all these young comedians who come out here and they use strong language and four-letter words and things like that. And he said, I've got to say right away, he said, that's not me.
I mean, he had the audacity to say to me, this boy, Peter Cook, he said, because he said, you must be original, you must have a different slant. He said, after all, the last solo entertainer we had here was Lenny Bruce. So I said, oh, now, be very careful. I said, I'm sorry. No. I said, look, I live here. I've got nowhere to flee to. I live here. And ladies and gentlemen, I must tell you this. I hope you haven't got the wrong impression. Ladies and gentlemen, if you've come along here tonight, because I'm no Lenny Bruce. I'm sorry, I'm no Lenny Bruce. And if you've come here tonight expecting a lot of crudeness and a lot of vulgarity, I'm sorry, you won't get it from me, so you might
I think you better all piss off now. And it brought the house down. And from then on, he couldn't put a foot wrong.
Frank always claimed he just did his ordinary workers' playtime act, didn't he? But because they were sort of university kids, I'd never heard that sort of material before. It went like a storm.
You know, it's curious, he had big fans with, like, the younger people, like the trendy ones. I mean, Frankie Howerd said, but I don't do satire, you know, and they said, oh, no, you'll be terribly good. But you see, that was when all his writer fans came into play.
Probably Frank got everybody that he knew and got them all to contribute to it, you know, and everybody did it for the love of it. I mean, I know he didn't pay anybody, so he didn't pay us for our contribution.
The thing about Frankie at the Establishment was that he had this wonderful trick. It was basically his old act, but he was being able to use his old act on new material.
As you know, if you do know at all, I'm a humble music hall comedian, a sort of variety artist. You know, I'm not usually associated with these sophisticated venues. And I, you know, well, I mean, a lot of people have said to me, no, I'm surprised at you going to a place like that. And it is a bit different to a Granada tour with Billy Fury. So I thought if I could explain how how I happen to be here, it might take the blame off me a bit, you understand? It might disarm criticism a bit, you understand? And you won't expect anything sort of too sophisticated. Now, no, please, now, please. Now, please, don't, this is going to be a rowdy do, I can sense it.
In the past, the BBC, for example, had a ban on making jokes about politics and politicians, but suddenly, because of this new wave of so-called satire, they were fair game. And what Frankie did wonderfully was to bring them down to the level of kitchen comedy. It was a sort of over-the-garden wall kind of approach. He would be able to dismiss Harold Macmillan by saying, oh, it's not his fault, it's Dot's, Lady Dorothy Macmillan. And so immediately he'd found a lower common denominator. And apart from that, he just rambled on as he always had done, but it suddenly seemed fresh and shocking that he was applying this old vaudeville technique to a totally new range of subjects.
But now, as I say, the only thing personal, this is nothing to do with you. I mean, I don't think... I mean, you've got your own worries. You don't come in here to hear my worries. I know that. But the only personal things I say that I've got against Harold is this business about never having had it so good. Because according to the Prime Minister of England, I have never had it so good. I want to tell you here and now, ladies and gentlemen, this second house Wednesday, that I haven't had it for weeks. Mind you, my luck might change while I'm here because you get some funny people upstairs. But what makes me laugh, you know, is the idea of me sitting here defending a Prime Minister, because I just think, you know, that before it was a Prime Minister that changed my life. I don't mean change a la April Ashley. I didn't mean that kind of change. Though it might come to that if things don't improve a bit. No. Yes, no, I mean, no, what I mean is that before the war I had this great ideas of being a straight actor. You know, we all get them eventually. And being a straight actor. And I wanted to be a straight actor, you know. And, yes, yeah, I know. Oh, I did, I mean, to be honest, I never thought I should end up by being the laughingstock of Greek Street, I must tell you. Though, I say, I did a little bit of Shakespeare, I did at the Old Vic. I don't know if any of you saw my bottom, but you're not seeing it tonight, I'll tell you that much. Just a whimsy. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I mean, the gag, not my bottom, of course. Anyway, the thing was, before it was a broadcast that changed my life, actually. A broadcast, and yours. I should never forget it. September the 3rd, 1939. Do you know when I think of it now, my stomach goes over. I can remember it, 11 o'clock in the morning, 11 a.m. was a hush over the whole country. No such undertaking having been received, His Majesty's government has had no alternative but to declare war on Germany. Bloody stupid. Bloody stupid. There was only about 300 in the government, including the Speaker. Now, what chance did they have against Germany? Will you tell me? So they had to drag us all in, you see.
He was a huge success in that one show he did. Result of, that was the week that was running on television, and they said, come and do your spot. That same spot on television, which he did. And Frankie was back.
If he'd flopped at the establishment, nobody would have noticed, really. Things would have gone on much the same. As it was, he had this sensational success, and Frankie, of course, used it as a stepping stone. I put him on TW3, and he'd always been wise enough to cultivate and keep in with countless writers, and he was voracious about the way that he would feed off them. I remember when we did the TW3, he'd got a lot of it, of course, from the act that he'd done at the establishment, but we hired a rehearsal room for him for a week, and he sort of paced and pounded around that all by himself for a week, breaking off only to ring up this whole roster of writers in order to magpie more and more and more stuff into his little comic nest.
I saw the producer, this Ned Sherrin, and nice man underneath, and he and of course he said to me, confronted me. He said, I want you, he said, to address the nation on the budget. Because I know what he wanted. I know what he expected. He expected a diatribe of viciousness and satire and knocking everybody and being unkind, you see. And of course, that's not me. I mean, I don't approve of this sort of thing. I'm never saying I do. I don't approve of it. I think if you can't find anything good to say, don't say anything at all. I mean, I'm more the lovable kind of comedian, you know. Well, don't take a vote on it. And, you see, I'm not going to... And, of course, I mean, these days, in any case, you can't be filthy unless you've got a degree. And,
You're listening to There'll Never Be Another Frankie Howerd, with me, Graham Garden. Here's Jimmy Casey again.
Suddenly, you had these, what would you call them, sort of graduates doing the television show with their funny stuff, but a lot of it graduate-type humour, and on comes this very experienced professional, and he was a revelation to the audience who didn't know him, and he just destroyed them. And from then on, he took off again. But it was this impact of the experienced, polished performer suddenly coming on, where, although it was very clever and so on, a lot of the stuff they did was amateurish, in the sense that they often didn't know when to stop. But then suddenly this old pro comes on doing a professional performance, and they were all knocked out, and so the viewers.
He hated being too intellectual, too smart, which is why he was such a success. That was the way that was, because he played as if he was an end of the pier comedian and shouldn't really be here. Yeah, I don't understand why they've asked me to do this. I mean, I'm usually in the pier at Margate. Well, I said, mind you, I mean, if they're prepared to pay. So, because then he does political jokes, satirical bits and pieces, but under the guise of being in the wrong place. He shouldn't really be here, mind you. You know, I mean, I don't do politics, you see. I mean, I think if you can't say anything nice about people, it's best not to say anything. So, I mean, I'm not a knocking comedian, mind you. And then he'd go on and do about 3 minutes of knocking the government or whatever, you know.
If there's anything political, he'd always come round it to make it sort of an old womanish type of thing. I mean, when he said, I told Harold, he said, I told him about, you know, don't you get involved in this, don't you do this, don't, and now you watch it. And he said, but I got fed up shouting through the letterbox number 10, you know.
Another enormous hit, and he was reborn. And then they couldn't wait to get him on. Then we wrote 2 series for him on television in 1965, you know, 3 years after he'd been written off.
Frank's career took another to the top. He would never get another 42% of the population because there were so many things happening. But he was back on top again.
Suddenly became a cult, a real cult figure, and rebuilt his career. So he knew that however easy success came, it could just as easily evaporate, and that made him he was insecure to begin with.
Michael Grade again.
And I was involved in getting Frankie Howerd to do Jack and the Beanstalk at the Palladium at pantomime one Christmas. And he was headlining, and it was, you know, big responsibility for him. And opening night, he was petrified, as always, you know. And he'd been walking around the block, vomiting, and, oh, terrible, white-faced, oh, God. And I was deputed to go back and cheer him up and jolly him along. So I went into his dressing room about half an hour before opening. So it's great, you know. It's a lovely, it's all kids, Frank, they'll love it, you know. It's a family audience. You haven't got the pros in tonight, and a few critics, but don't worry about it, it's going to be great. Bookings are fantastic, you know, anything I could think of to put him at his ease. And I was, you know, he'd heard all this before, you know, this was all just kind of noise in the background, and it was his eyes were sunk into the back of his head. Suddenly there was a knock at the door, and Vanessa Redgrave came in and decided that this was the moment she was going to recruit Frankie Howerd for the Workers' Revolutionary Party. And she started her pitch about the overthrow of the class struggle and all this. And he suddenly got aggressive, which was great because he's got the adrenaline going. He said, who is this woman? You know, get her out of here, you know. No, dear, yes, not you, yes, and all this. And he started performing. Anyway, eventually I shushed her out. Oh, and he was so indignant that a fellow thespian would come into an actor's dressing room, you know, minutes before opening night and start trying to flog him the Workers' Revolution. He went on the stage inspired. He forgot his nerves.
He worried deeply. He was a bundle of nerves. He agonised over everything. But once his nerves were jangling like that, he turned it positively and the adrenaline pumped and he'd go over. But he always walked onto a stage with trepidation, as if he was just beginning and not confident that it was going to work. And once he got his first laugh, he relaxed and he was away. There's jokes he used to do with his pianist and Salter and so forth.
Well, now, I'm going to be accompanied for this particular performance on the pianoforte by Madame Blanche Moore. Madame Blanche Moore, known to me as Flossie. known to Southend as Dockyard Dora. Don't laugh, poor old soul. Now, honey woman. No, don't. Don't laugh, it might be one of your own. Well, now, Flossie, give us an introduction, will you please? Introduction. Go on. Flossie, wait till the funeral's gone by. Go on, we don't need bebop. Come on, straight in. Song first, patter after. Go. Now... That's it. Now, for goodness sake, keep your finger on that. Now, quick. Song first, patter after. Now, down by the stream in the meadow, the larks are still gently singing. Come away. Oh, I'll do the patter, shall I? I'll have her done away with tomorrow. Hey, she's better off out of it. Go on, dear, go and have a lay down.
Frankie was one of those amazing comedians who basically had one individual style, and he didn't deviate from that. I don't suppose he could, but that was Frankie. And you came to see Frankie doing, Frankie Howerd material.
He didn't really change his act very much. He'd had the huge success in his early days when he was sort of fresh and new, but the act tended to carry on being a bit the same. Then came the great spurt of the establishment and TW3. He was Flavour of the Month again. Then there was the wonderfully lucky thing of Bert Shevloff and Larry Gelbart and Stephen Sondheim writing a huge hit musical, Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum. He starred in that and again was an enormous success.
Playgoers, I bid you welcome. The theatre is a temple, and we are here to worship the gods of comedy and tragedy. Tonight, I am pleased to announce a comedy. We shall employ every device we know in our desire to divert you. Something familiar, something peculiar, something for everyone, a comedy tonight. Something appealing, something appalling, something for everyone, a comedy tonight. Nothing with kings, nothing with crowns, bring on the lovers, liars and clowns. Old situations, new complications, nothing portentous or polite. Ready tomorrow.
As a result of that, a television series, Up Pompeii, was devised for him. Now, the wonderful thing about Up Pompeii was that it did present him in a different light as far as the television viewer was concerned, but he was still able to buttonhole the camera.
My flat keeps getting up, you see. It's a draft round here. And it came to pass... Someone leaking... Oh, it's you, mistress. She's hissed again. We've got a common lot here tonight, I'll tell you.
Frankie was doing all the Frankie jokes and gags, but as it was in that sort of Roman setting, he seemed to have a fresh twist to it, which was cleverness on the part of the creators.
He held the whole thing together by talking to the audience. But again, if you look at that thing, look at the script he had to do, you would say, well, how did they ever get this past the producers? Because what he had to say was really nothing. What he did put in, there was a lot of ad-lib, like, oh, no, listen. This is what he put in.
Our story this week. Can I go high, then? With this cold bench. We are. That's better. Our story this week concerns Icarus. Now, Icarus, as you know, was the first man to attempt flight. Now, he had the want, often, wait a minute, of laying there in the sun, head, with his head like that, arms under his head, looking. And he, in the sun, on his back, studying the birds. And, yes, wait a minute. And you see, but he couldn't find the secret of flight. But one day he was lying there, arms akimbo, looking up in the air, and a little bird was flying overhead. And suddenly it hit him. So he rushed out, and he made a pair of wings for his arms, you see, took the cord out of what is that again? So he rushed out, put a pair... Oh, God help him. The pills are wearing off already.
The great thing about Frankie was that he really did need an audience reaction. I made 3 films with him, and when you made a movie with Frankie, it was agonizing in a sense, because while he was rehearsing in front of the crew and with the other actors, people would laugh hysterically because he was very funny. Well, of course, in a film studio, the moment the red light goes on, all has to be silence. And so instead of being able to feed off the reaction of people laughing at him, which was terribly important to Frankie, because he was far more a personality comedian than he was an actor, instead of getting that reassurance of laughter, he was faced every time with complete silence and just had to trust his timing without the benefit of confirmation by the audience. With Up Pompeii in the studio, he had a studio audience, so he could feed off that, and the oohs and the ahs could soar depending on how much the audience were laughing and applauding.
Yes, mistress.
Ekiam, has my husband gone yet?
Yes, mistress, he's gone.
Good. Then come up to my bedroom.
Bedroom?
Yes, quickly.
Oh, they don't waste any time, do they? Oh, but it's not right, is it? I mean, not so soon after eating, is it? Well, it's like swimming. You can't do it after a heavy meal. Well, I mean, at least not energetically. I mean, you can perhaps a bit of the breaststroke.
The role that Frankie played in Up Pompeii and its spin-offs, a leering would-be womanizer, wasn't reflected in his private life, as the young student journalist Barry Cryer discovered.
Leeds Empire Theatre in about 1955. He was a massive radio name. And I mooted to the Union News, Leeds University in-house, our newspaper, that I would go, terrible looking back, real groupie stuff, I would go and interview people at the old Empire Theatre. And I got into a little routine with the stage doorkeeper. I'd drop a note in on the Monday. And, you know, if I was lucky enough to get a reply, I'd go back and interview them sometime. But Frank replied very quickly and invited me down between the shows on the Friday night. He turned up at the stage door with a huge dog, which has nothing to do with the story at all. And I interviewed him. And he turned it round, of course, always did. He turned it round into an interview with me. What are you doing with your life? And what is this Ing-Lit degree and all this went on? And then one or two things occurred which I don't think are within the remit of this programme, but I didn't make an excuse and leave. He took rejection very nicely, Frank. I never reminded him of that because, you know, I worked for him years later and got to know him very well and became a dear friend, but I never reminded him of that first meeting.
We were working in Chatham, my father, Jimmy James, myself and Eli Woods, and Frankie was at the other theatre. He had just become famous, and the manager of the theatre met us, and my father said, "Oh, this fella, Frankie Howard, what's he like? How'd he get on?" He said, "Well, I've just had a thing with him," he said. This was Saturday morning. He said his boyfriend was with him, and that was the first time we had heard that he was gay, you see. He said his boyfriend was with him, and he's left him. And he was in tears, crying his eyes out, and he said he's going to commit suicide. And I said, "You do 2 shows tonight, lad, and commit suicide tomorrow."
I always enjoy
Julian Clary.
People like Kenneth Williams and Frankie Howard, who are so blatantly gay, and they may not have been completely out of the closet in the context of the day, but frankly I don't think they could have been and got any work, so that wasn't really an option. But apart from that, they just didn't seem to care.
It's very camp and bitchy, which is it can be very appealing and very funny. You know, like Kenneth Williams, and certainly in those days, you know, the high camp was very popular, and it was also very funny. And Frank was camp and bitchy. It wasn't his only attribute, but I mean, it was certainly a good one to have.
I always remember charity show, I think it was at Drury Lane, and Wendy Craig did a very funny monologue in tweeds as a very county lady, and then went off to very warm applause, and Frank shambled on, and he was a friend of Wendy Craig's, nothing to do with anything. He shambled on, looked after where she'd gone off the stage, looked back at the audience and said, "Cow." One word which collapsed the theatre, because it was so unjustified and from nowhere. And Bruce Forsyth took over the Wogan show, when the Wogan show was 3 shows a week. Terry would have the odd holiday or whatever and have a guest host. And Bruce said, I want Frank as a guest if we can get him. Frank agreed to do it on Wednesday. They'd known each other for years. And Bruce said to Frank, let's do a duet.
No. I can't lower myself.
Look, all you got to do is very simple. Just stand there. Just stand. Even when the darkest clouds are in the sky, when things go wrong.
And they sang the song, and it was absolutely delightful, the two of them, as a duet.
A little happiness as you go by.
Frank went all serious, and so we've been fooling around Bruce a lot, but he said, I really enjoyed that. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, just quickly, before we go, I want to say that I had no idea at all that you could sing so well. Really, you have a marvellous voice. I mean that very sincerely.
What a lovely thing to say, Frank.
Bruce was quite touched and said, Frankie Howard, ladies and gentlemen. Frank walked off straight past the camera, looked straight into the camera and said,
shocking, wasn't it?
He could just do it with one word. Bruce loved it, of course. He was the master of that. He could destroy anybody with one word, or one look, or noise sometimes. Wonderful.
He was back to doing the stand-up thing again, and it tended to be the same basic formula of an act.
Frankie Howard would often start a routine with how it comes to be there. So it would start off with, well, I was at home and the phone went, and then you'd have to hear all about why he was at home and how he wasn't feeling very well, and then he finally would leave the flat to come to the studio, and then something would happen along the way.
No. No. Well, what? Oh, no. No, I'm glad you asked. No, fair dues. No. It's all started last Monday. What's it Monday? No, Tuesday. That's right, you're Tuesday. No, it was Monday. No, I felt funny. And I don't mean that to make a change. No, I don't mean, not like I feel now. I feel funny, sort of, ha-ha. No, I felt funny, peculiar. Because I came out in little red blotches. Oh, it was a shame, poor Francis. Little red blotches all over. I say all over. I don't mean all over. I mean, why no? I mean all over because. So I went to see my doctor. He said, I went to see the doctor. He said, I haven't seen you for some time. I said, no, I've been ill. He said, there's one there. You see, I'm started already. I could tell. He wasn't taking me seriously, this doctor, so I showed him my big red blotch. That shook him. He fell right off his nurse. And he said, I think you've got some rare form of chicken pox. I said, that's a rash statement. I said, no. Common as muck, this lot, I knew it. You fools, you mad fools. What are you? Fools. What are you? Fools, that's right. As daft as I am for me, Philip. Well, I'll pay for these jokes, I may as well use them. Now, where was I? Oh, yes, this doctor, he sent me to see the specialist, this doctor. He sent me to see a specialist to see. So I arrived at this hospital, the casualty department, and this man said, you can't come in here unless you've had an accident, you see. So I went outside, I had an accident. And I got myself run over by a pram, and I limped back in, and this man said, that's better now, what's wrong with you? I said, well, my doctor thinks I've got chicken pox. So he said, go to room 42. Room 42, he said. What did I say, run 42? No, room 42. And he said, and take all your clothes off. See? So I did, took all my clothes off. He said, the specialist will be in to see you shortly. So I thought, that's a bit much. I came in with chicken pox. Now they want to look at me shortly. Anyway, I was lying on this table with just a sheet over my naked form. And 3 female members of this hospital mob, wearing their white coats, walked in. And one of them walked over, raised the corner of the sheet, had a good look, giggled, and walked back again. My life, a minute later, another of these white uniformed ladies did the same thing, walked forward, raised the corner of the sheet, and giggled. Returned to the side of the room. I thought, this is a liberty. This is a liberty. I mean, you'd think these medical types would be used to looking at nice, naked bodies by now, wouldn't you? Anyway, when the third comes over, lifts the sheet, you see, takes a butcher's, I thought this is ridiculous. So I pulled off my sheet and I said, look, is this chicken pox or not? And she said, I have the elder winner with just the tea ladies.
There's a joke in every line, isn't there? I like it when he waits for the audience. He does a lot of that. Come along now, try and winkle it out. Larry Grayson would also have very long involved stories.
Frank's bête noire was Larry Grayson. Because, you know, Frank was always saying everybody's pinching my act, and Kenneth Williams has pinched my act, and he's pinched my act, and they've pinched my act. And he got a real thing about Larry. Particularly when Larry started using a pianist and making remarks about the pianist, and then looking at the audience. And I think that did get a bit near the mark. And one ambition he cherished was to take over the Generation Game. And then, of course, who got the job after Bruce left was Larry Grayson, which cut deep with Frank. I don't think he would have been good on that. He wasn't an MC, a masterful MC. He was a shambolic guest and loose cannon, Frank.
Well, I woke up this morning and I sort of felt funny. And... What do you mean about time? No, I felt pale and wan. Yeah, I felt pale and sort of wan. And have you ever felt wan? You dare, go on, you dare answer. Well, and I looked at myself in the mirror and I thought, dear God, Francis, you're looking nearly 40. I really felt... They can be so hurtful, that lot. They can be so mocking Francis. I know exactly what to say to hurt me. No, but I tell you, no, it's a funny thing. You see, I happen to be here at all because what's the day, Russell? But yeah, Wednesday. Well, last Saturday, I was laying in bed mending a puncture, and what? No, in a puncture. Well, no, odd. What do you mean odd? No. Thing is, these water beds. They're very good for the back, you know. This water bed I've got, I had mine specially made. All you have to do, you have to put your feet, your ankles, through the leather straps at the bottom of the bed, you see. And through the top straps on the bedpost, you see. And you lay there, look up at yourself in the mirror on the ceiling. And, no, it's very restful. And some of these chains, the iron chains pinch a bit. But... what do you mean, kinky? What's kinky? Not kinky at all. Listen, this is an orthopaedic bed. I got this on prescription. Look, he doesn't understand. You see, the whole thing is supposed to be a joke, this, you know. This is what we call a comedy routine. I mean, I don't really do it. Not since that accident with the kipper. And I'll tell you... How dare you go me into a fury? What do you mean, mad? No, anyway, the phone rang, so I took off my leather mask, and there was oh, no, don't. Look, listen, you're making this a mockery.
A new audience came along, in many cases a university audience who were too young to have known him in the past, and so he came up entirely fresh to them, and so they discovered him in their turn.
I saw him do a show at a university, and that was wonderful to see a man in his golden years being taken up by the students of a new generation who'd never seen him or heard him in the past, and going out there and just being Frankie Howerd as Frankie Howerd always was, not adapting his material, not adapting his style, just being Frankie. And the audience, that student audience, loving it. I mean, that is talent. That's real talent, you know, to stick to one type of delivery and style and still have the audience love it.
Very few could hold an audience in thrall as he could when he was in full flight. Funny man. Who wrote this stuff? He used to say. Didn't take himself seriously on the stage, which was nice. He had little theories about comedy. He says, you have to wear a warm colour. If you're a comedian, he said, you have to wear browns. He said, never wear grey. Blue, certain shades of blue. And he had all these little theories. Mostly you wore brown, so he felt that was a warm colour, not a cold. Don't wear a cold colour. Never wear a cold colour. It's all part of his insecurity.
He felt that he was human. He was a human being. He was struggling with the world that he lived, and it was a very interesting idea. I mean, he's not too clever. And I think that always makes a comedian better, more lovable, funnier for his problems. He doesn't quite know what's going on. None of us quite know what's going on, and that was a very important part, I think.
There was a wonderful lugubriousness about it, which could occasionally turn sharp, and he had that wonderful way of apologising for insulting people, and as a result increasing the magnitude of the insult. And it was highly distinctive, of course, just in the same way that Kenneth Williams, or nowadays, I suppose, Graham Norton's voice is, or Julian Clary's. But Frankie's was capable of doing a whole range of oohs and ahs and ups and downs. He got a whole diapason of odd, affronted noises could come out of him. I don't think Frankie was ever a happy man. I think he was always insecure and worried about the terrible wig that he wore, which he was frightfully self-conscious about. And I don't think he was happy about his appearance. I think he knew he was a great comedian, but I'm not sure that even that made him happy.
A very sweet, gentle, lovable man, you know. A very kind, genuine man. But he also knew what he wanted and what would work for him. I actually worked on one of the very last jobs that Frankie Howerd ever did. It was a commercial, and I remember I arrived on the same day that Frankie was filming, and Frankie was saying, "This doesn't work. It doesn't work." And he was getting terribly tense. And, "No, I've been looking at it. It's not right. It doesn't work. And I know what they've done. I can't do this," and so forth. And the producer came in and he talked to him. And he said, "Well, you know, really, that's not me to do it like that." I mean, and he agonised and discussed another way of doing it, which would suit him, Frankie, and his personality, as he knew the public would respond. And of course he was right. They did it the way he suggested, and it worked very well.
You cannot put Frank down as a standard because he was unique. It's like you cannot get maybe another Salvador Dali, or you cannot get another Matisse or Picasso. He was unique. So when you sum him up, I doubt whether there'll be anybody in my lifetime, certainly, but I'm at the 8th furlong marker now, but he will be, for me, one of the greatest unique comics of our time.
On There'll Never Be Another Frankie Howerd, which was produced by John Pidgeon and Jeremy Pascal, you heard Jimmy Casey, Julian Clary, Barry Cryer, Ray Galton, Michael Grade, Eric Idle, Paul O'Grady, Nicholas Parsons, Ned Sherrin, Alan Simpson, Eric Sykes, Barry Took and Beryl Virtue. I'm Graham Garden.